The hum of alien machinery filled the vast amphitheater as Commander Nathan Cade stood among a crowd of alien students, his hands tucked casually into his jacket pockets. Around him, the chatter of disbelief and mockery rose like the low tide. Proxima Nova's Galactic Academy was home to the galaxy's brightest minds, yet its halls were often unkind to humans, who were considered the weakest link in the interstellar chain. Nathan's sharp green eyes scanned the towering figure on the stage. Professor Zinark's pale, iridescent skin glowed faintly under the artificial lights, his tendrils shifting lazily as he observed the crowd. His voice, sharp and dripping with condescension, echoed through the amphitheater. Today's lesson, Zinark began, will test your ability to survive in the most hostile conditions. You will build a functional shelter, capable of withstanding an acid storm, in 1 hour. Failure will result in immediate disqualification from this module. For some of you, his gaze fell squarely on Nathan, this may prove to be an insurmountable task. Nathan smirked but said nothing. The tension in the air was palpable. Beside him, a feline-like alien with shimmering black fur, eyes glowing gold, leaned closer and hissed, "You should sit this one out, human. This isn't a test for your limited species." Nathan didn't flinch. "I'll manage," he replied coolly, his voice steady. Zinark's tendrils twitched in amusement. "Now, to make things interesting, I have prepared the simulation arena with dynamically shifting conditions. You will need to adapt, innovate, and persevere. Or, as I suspect in some cases, you will fail spectacularly." The arena began to transform as Zinark waved a hand. Holographic projections rose from the floor, materializing into a barren, alien desert. Jagged cliffs loomed on the horizon, and the air shimmered with heat. The oppressive environment was designed to break even the most prepared minds. Nathan tilted his head, studying the surroundings with a practiced eye. He wasn't here to prove anything to Zinark or the sneering aliens around him. He was here because, for too long, humanity had been dismissed as primitive, a relic of a bygone era that had no place among the stars. That narrative ended today. "Your tools," Zinark announced, as tables materialized across the arena, "are provided at the central station. Use them wisely. The timer begins, now." The students scattered, a blur of alien forms rushing to the tables. Nathan walked with purpose, unhurried, as he assessed the equipment, sheets of alien alloys, modular components, and multi-tools far more advanced than anything he had seen on Earth. "Still sizing it up, human," the feline alien from earlier sneered as they grabbed an armful of materials. Nathan ignored the taunt and selected only a few tools, a plasma cutter, an adhesive applicator, and a reflective alloy sheet. One of the observers, Lyra, a slender, amphibious alien with translucent skin, watched him curiously. "That's all you're taking?" "You'll need more than that," she said, her voice tentative. Nathan shot her a quick grin. Sometimes less is more. He found a spot near the edge of the arena and got to work. His movements were deliberate, his military training guiding every decision. While the others scrambled to assemble towering structures, Nathan began by sketching a simple frame in the dirt. Zinark watched from his elevated platform, his eyes narrowing as he noticed Nathan's calm demeanor. "Interesting approach," he muttered to himself. Then, with a subtle flick of his hand, he adjusted the simulation parameters. The holographic sun burned brighter, and the temperature rose sharply. Nathan felt the heat pressing against his back but didn't falter. He used the reflective alloy sheet to deflect the sun's rays, creating a cooler workspace. The simplicity of the solution caught Lyra's attention again. She glanced at her own chaotic pile of materials, then back at Nathan's methodical progress. "You really think that's going to work?" she asked, her tone skeptical but less mocking this time. "It's not about thinking," Nathan replied without looking up. "It's about knowing. I've built shelters in deserts, jungles, and tundras. The principles don't change." The words carried weight, silencing her doubts momentarily. Meanwhile, chaos unfolded around him. An insectoid alien was struggling with an overly complex design, its structure collapsing under its own weight. A reptilian student cursed loudly as their materials warped in the heat. Zinark's amusement grew with each failure. But Nathan's progress remained steady. He assembled a triangular frame, securing it with reinforced joints and a lightweight canopy designed to repel corrosive elements. His movements were efficient, almost surgical. As the timer ticked down, Zinark raised the stakes again. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and acidic rain began to fall. Nathan glanced up, unperturbed. He grabbed the adhesive applicator and sealed the canopy's edges with precision. The rain sizzled harmlessly against the shelter's surface. Lyra's shelter, meanwhile, was crumbling under the weight of the rain. She glanced at Nathan, then at her own mess, frustration evident on her face. "How are you doing this so fast?" she finally asked. Nathan paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "You're overthinking it. Survival's not about perfection, it's about efficiency. What's the bare minimum you need to stay alive? Focus on that." Her translucent skin flushed a shade darker, and she hesitated before nodding. She began simplifying her design, clearly influenced by his approach. With 10 minutes left on the clock, Nathan's shelter was complete. It wasn't flashy or elaborate, but it was solid, functional, and efficient. He stepped back, surveying his work with quiet satisfaction. Zinark descended from his platform, his expression unreadable. He approached Nathan's shelter and ran a hand along its edges, testing the strength of the materials. "Remarkable," he said at last, though his tone was laced with reluctance. "You've managed to create a structure that meets the criteria in record time." Nathan met Zinark's gaze, his expression calm. "I told you I only needed 10 minutes. The professor's tendrils twitched in irritation, but he said nothing. Around them, the other students began to take notice. Whispers filled the air as they compared their own struggles to Nathan's effortless success. As Zinark turned to address the group, Nathan leaned against his shelter, arms crossed. He wasn't here for applause or validation. He was here to remind them that humanity had earned its place in the stars, not through arrogance or brute force, but through adaptability, ingenuity, and the unyielding will to survive. The timer buzzed, and the simulation dissolved, leaving the students standing in the sterile amphitheater once more. Nathan walked away without a word, the faintest hint of a smirk playing on his lips. Behind him, Zinark's voice carried through the room. "Class dismissed." Nathan Cade stood near the edge of the simulated arena, arms crossed as the acidic rain cascaded off his shelter in harmless rivulets. Around him, other students scrambled in desperation. Collapsing structures and frantic curses filled the air, the chaos growing more palpable with every passing moment. Nathan's calm amidst the storm wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Professor Zinark. The professor's tendrils twitched in irritation as he observed Nathan's progress. He didn't understand how a human, of all beings, could work with such precision and confidence. Zinark had expected the human to falter, to crumble under the weight of his own arrogance. Yet, there Nathan stood, leaning casually against his completed structure as if he had all the time in the galaxy. "Impressive," murmured Lyra, standing a few feet away as her own shelter showed signs of structural failure. Her translucent skin darkened in frustration as she abandoned an overcomplicated framework. How did he finish so fast? Nathan didn't acknowledge her curiosity right away. Instead, he watched the chaos unfold with a slight frown. One alien, an insectoid species with delicate limbs, struggled to maneuver its tools, its shelter sagging under the acidic onslaught. A reptilian student cursed loudly as the rain melted sections of its canopy. Everywhere Nathan looked, he saw over-engineered ideas failing in real-world conditions. "Focus on the essentials." Nathan called out, his voice cutting through the din. "You don't need to build a fortress. Just make something that works." The simplicity of his advice struck Lyra. She stepped closer, holding her toolkit hesitantly. "It's not that simple for the rest of us," she said, her tone carrying a mix of irritation and intrigue. "These materials don't respond the way they should. It's like the simulation's working against us." Nathan glanced at her shelter, a spindly, overambitious design barely holding together. He knelt and examined her framework. You're trying to build something perfect. That's your problem. Perfection takes time you don't have. He pointed at the collapsing joints. Simplify it. Use what you've got, not what you wish you had. She hesitated, her pride bruised, but the logic was undeniable. Lyra began dismantling the unnecessary parts of her structure, glancing at Nathan for guidance. He didn't hover or dictate, he simply gave quick, practical advice when she faltered. Use the reflective alloy there, he said at one point. It'll deflect the acid rain instead of absorbing it. Meanwhile, Zinark watched with growing irritation. Nathan's shelter wasn't just functional, it was inspiring others to rethink their strategies. The human's ability to lead, even indirectly, was a threat to Zinark's carefully curated narrative of human inadequacy. Time to turn up the pressure, Zinark muttered to himself. With a subtle gesture, he adjusted the simulation parameters. The rain intensified, and gusts of wind tore through the arena. The temperature dropped abruptly, forcing students to adapt once again. Nathan felt the cold bite through his jacket but didn't flinch. Instead, he reinforced the edges of his shelter, adding weight to keep it grounded. The sudden shift in conditions rattled the other students. Lyra stumbled as her shelter wavered under the increasing strain. "This isn't fair," she shouted, glaring up at Zinark. "The conditions are impossible." "Adaptation is the essence of survival," Zinark replied coldly. "If you can't handle it, you don't belong here." Nathan straightened and stepped toward Lyra's shelter. "You need to anchor it better," he said, his tone steady. "The wind's going to tear it apart if you don't." He handed her a spare adhesive applicator. "Here. Use this." She hesitated, then took the tool with a small nod of gratitude. Together, they secured the shelter's foundation, stabilizing it against the howling winds. Other students began to follow Nathan's example, simplifying their designs and focusing on functionality. The tide was turning, and Zinark didn't like it. "You seem to enjoy playing savior, Commander Cade," Zinark said, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he descended from his observation platform. "But survival is not a team sport. Your assistance won't earn you extra credit." Nathan glanced at the professor, unfazed. "Survival's not a solo sport either," he replied. "If you're in a real crisis, you don't leave people behind." Zinark's eyes narrowed. "And yet, in the end, only one person can win. Altruism is a weakness, not a virtue." Nathan smirked, shaking his head. "That's where you're wrong. Helping others isn't weakness, it's strategy. A team that works together survives together." Zinark's tendrils quivered, but he said nothing. The professor's disdain was clear, but Nathan wasn't interested in changing his mind. He had already accomplished what he'd set out to do. His shelter stood firm, a testament to humanity's ingenuity, and his example had begun to shift the perspectives of those around him. The timer ticked down, the final minutes slipping away. By now, most of the students had stabilized their shelters, though none matched the efficiency of Nathan's design. Lyra stood next to him, her expression a mix of exhaustion and grudging admiration. "You're not what I expected, human," she admitted. "Most of your kind don't last long here." Nathan shrugged. "We've been underestimated before. It usually works in our favor." The final buzzer sounded, and the simulation dissolved. The harsh desert faded, replaced by the sterile amphitheater. The students stood among the remnants of their efforts, their expressions ranging from relief to frustration. Zinark strode forward, his gaze sweeping over the group. "Some of you have shown promise," he said, his tone begrudging. "And some of you," his eyes flicked to Nathan, "have surprised me." Nathan raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He didn't need Zinark's approval. The results spoke for themselves. As the students filed out of the arena, Lyra lingered for a moment. "Thanks," she said quietly. "For the advice. And for not letting me fail." Nathan gave her a small nod. "Just remember, it's not about how much you know. It's about how fast you learn." She smiled faintly before turning to leave. Nathan watched her go, his mind already turning to the next challenge. He wasn't here to win approval or accolades. He was here to prove that humanity had earned its place in the stars, and he was just getting started. The amphitheater hummed with quiet tension as the students assembled for the post-challenge evaluation. Nathan Cade leaned casually against a column, his calm demeanor masking the weight of what had just transpired. Around him, the murmurs of alien voices carried a mix of frustration and reluctant admiration. It was clear that, despite their initial disdain, the students couldn't ignore what they had witnessed. Professor Zinark stood at the center of the room, his pale skin glowing faintly under the overhead lights. His expression was as impassive as ever, though Nathan caught the faintest twitch of his tendrils, a subtle betrayal of his irritation. Zinark's gaze swept over the group, pausing briefly on Nathan before addressing the room. Today's exercise was intended to separate those with potential from those who rely on luck and brute force, Zinark began, his voice sharp and cold. For some, it was an enlightening experience. For others, a sobering reminder of their limitations. The professor gestured, and a holographic projection appeared in the air, displaying the results of the challenge. It highlighted the performance metrics of each shelter: structural integrity, adaptability, and time efficiency. Nathan's name sat at the top, the data glowing brighter than the rest. His shelter had outperformed every other structure in the arena by a significant margin. A ripple of murmurs spread through the group. Lyra, standing nearby, glanced at Nathan with something resembling respect. The other students exchanged uncertain looks, their earlier condescension replaced by quiet acknowledgement. Zinark's tendrils twitched again as he turned to Nathan. "Commander Cade," he said, his tone measured but laced with contempt. "Your performance today was unexpected. Your shelter not only met the requirements but surpassed them." That said, he stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "I suspect you relied more on instinct than actual skill." Nathan straightened, meeting Zinark's gaze without hesitation. "Instinct is part of survival," he said evenly. "But if you're suggesting I got lucky, I think the results speak for themselves." Zinark's jaw tightened. "Results can be deceiving," he said. "Survival is about more than one isolated success. It requires consistency, discipline, and an understanding of complexity, qualities your species has yet to fully grasp." Nathan's lips quirked into a faint smile. "With all due respect, Professor, I think humanity has been grasping complexity for a long time. We've had to. Survival on Earth wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. Every storm, every disaster, every conflict forced us to adapt. That's why we're still here." The room fell silent, the weight of Nathan's words hanging in the air. For a moment, even Zinark seemed at a loss for a retort. The professor's tendrils stilled, and his expression darkened. One of the students, a towering reptilian alien with scales that shimmered in shades of green and gold, broke the silence. "He's not wrong," the alien said, its voice a deep rumble. "I struggled today because I tried to overthink the problem. Cade didn't. He kept it simple, and it worked." Lyra nodded, stepping forward. "Same here," she admitted. "I was too focused on making my shelter perfect. If Cade hadn't pointed out what I was doing wrong, I probably wouldn't have finished in time." Zinark's tendrils twitched violently, but he masked his frustration with a curt nod. "Be that as it may," he said, his voice cold, "one success does not elevate humanity to the level of the species represented in this academy. You remain unproven." Nathan chuckled softly, shaking his head. "It's not about proving anything to you, Professor," he said. "It's about showing what's possible. Humanity's been underestimated before, and every time, we've risen to the challenge." Zinark opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, the amphitheater doors slid open with a soft hiss. A tall figure entered, its presence commanding instant attention. It was Chancellor Venara, the Academy's overseer, a being of radiant energy encased in a translucent exosuit. The Chancellor's voice resonated like a symphony of bells. "I have been monitoring today's exercise," Venara said, her tone neutral yet authoritative. "And I must say, the results were intriguing. Nathan inclined his head respectfully. Chancellor. Venara's gaze settled on him, her luminous form pulsing faintly. Commander Cade, your performance today has sparked considerable discussion among the faculty. Your ability to adapt and lead is unconventional, yet undeniably effective. Zinark's expression hardened, but he remained silent as Venara continued. It is clear that humanity has more to offer than we have previously acknowledged. While there is still much to learn, today's outcome is a testament to your species' potential. Nathan met her gaze, his expression steady. Thank you, Chancellor. But this isn't just about potential. It's about collaboration. Humanity has always thrived when working together, whether with each other or with others. Venara nodded slowly, her form glowing brighter. A sentiment worth considering. She turned to the rest of the students. Let today's lesson serve as a reminder that survival is not solely the domain of the strongest or the most advanced. It is the domain of those who can adapt, innovate, and persevere. As the Chancellor departed, the amphitheater buzzed with subdued energy. Nathan glanced at Zinark, whose expression remained a mask of simmering irritation. You might not like it, Professor, Nathan said quietly, but humanity's here to stay. Zinark's eyes narrowed, and his tendrils coiled tightly. We shall see, Commander Cade. We shall see. As the students dispersed, Lyra caught up to Nathan, her expression thoughtful. You didn't just win today, she said. You changed the way a lot of us see humans. Nathan shrugged, a faint smile playing on his lips. That was the point. Still, she added, her tone lightening, don't let it go to your head. He chuckled, shaking his head. Don't worry. There's always another challenge waiting. As Nathan walked away, the faint hum of the amphitheater faded behind him. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The prejudice against humanity wouldn't vanish overnight, and Zinark's disdain was unlikely to waver. But none of that mattered. Nathan wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for the countless humans who had struggled, adapted, and persevered to carve out a place among the stars. And if today was any indication, humanity's story was far from over. The galaxy had underestimated Earth once. It wouldn't make that mistake again. Nathan Cade sat in the Academy's common lounge, staring out at the stars through the massive glass dome overhead. The galaxy sprawled before him, a glittering tapestry of distant suns, planets, and uncharted territory. His mind raced as he replayed the events of the last challenge. He had proven humanity's capability to the students, and even Chancellor Venara had acknowledged his efforts. But there was still one person who refused to see it, Professor Zinark. The professor's constant disdain wasn't just personal, it was a reflection of the galactic community's skepticism toward humans. Nathan knew that his victory in the simulation was just a small step. To truly change perceptions, he would need to achieve something monumental, something that no one, not even Zinark, could dismiss. The sound of soft footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Lyra approached, her translucent skin catching the faint glow of starlight. She held 2 steaming cups, offering one to Nathan. Figured you could use a break, she said, sitting across from him. Nathan accepted the drink with a nod. Thanks. Though I think this is the calm before the storm. Lyra raised an eyebrow. You mean Zinark? Nathan gave a short laugh. Who else? He's not going to let what happened today slide. He's definitely not a fan of yours, Lyra said, smirking. But he's also not the type to back down. I overheard him earlier, he's planning something. Nathan's gaze sharpened. What did he say? Something about a new test. He called it a true measure of survival. It sounded intense. Nathan leaned back, his jaw tightening. Figures. He's not going to make this easy. Lyra hesitated, then leaned forward. Why do you care so much, Nathan? I mean, you've already proven yourself. You could coast through the rest of the program and still come out on top. Nathan set his cup down and met her eyes. It's not about me. It's about what I represent. Humanity's been underestimated for too long. If I don't push back against that narrative, no one will. Lyra studied him for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. Just, don't let Zinark push you too far. He's not above bending the rules to get what he wants. Nathan's expression darkened. Noted. The next day, the students gathered in the Academy's briefing chamber. The atmosphere was tense as Zinark stepped forward, his presence commanding the room. His tendrils writhed in what could only be described as smug anticipation. Congratulations, he began, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Many of you performed adequately during the last challenge. However, survival is not a one-dimensional skill. It requires adaptability, resilience, and above all, the ability to think under pressure. Zinark waved his hand, and a holographic map appeared in the air. It depicted a desolate planet covered in jagged cliffs, deep ravines, and volatile weather patterns. This, he continued, is Merak 7, a Class 5 survival planet. It is one of the most hostile environments in the known galaxy. Your next test will take place here. A murmur spread through the room. Class 5 planets were infamous for their deadly conditions, reserved for advanced-level simulations. The stakes had just been raised. You will be transported to Merak 7 and tasked with retrieving a survival beacon located deep within its canyon system, Zinark explained. You'll have limited resources and only your wits to rely on. The first to activate the beacon will receive top marks. The rest, well, let's just say the Academy has high standards. Nathan's eyes narrowed. This wasn't just a test, it was a challenge aimed directly at him. He could feel Zinark's gaze lingering, as if daring him to fail. Any questions? Zinark asked, his tone mocking. Nathan raised a hand. What happens if someone doesn't make it back? Zinark's tendrils curled in amusement. Then they've learned a valuable lesson about their limitations. The room fell silent. Nathan exchanged a glance with Lyra, whose expression mirrored his unease. Hours later, the students were dropped onto Merak 7's surface. The planet was as unforgiving as the holograms had suggested. The air was thick with heat, the ground cracked and unstable. Jagged cliffs loomed in the distance, and dark storm clouds churned ominously overhead. Nathan scanned the horizon, his mind already racing. He had been given a small survival pack, standard issue for the test, but it was clear that the real challenge would be navigating the terrain and enduring the planet's relentless conditions. Stick together? Lyra asked, appearing at his side. Nathan nodded. For now. But stay sharp, this place isn't going to give us second chances. They began their trek toward the canyon system, their progress slow but steady. Around them, other students fanned out, each taking their own approach. The sound of distant thunder rolled through the air, a reminder that the weather could turn deadly at any moment. As they reached the edge of the canyon, a tremor shook the ground. Nathan grabbed Lyra's arm, steadying her as rocks tumbled into the ravine below. This place is a death trap, she muttered. That's the idea, Nathan replied. Come on. We need to move. They descended into the canyon, the walls towering high above them. The air grew cooler, but the path was treacherous, loose rocks and narrow ledges made every step a risk. Nathan led the way, his military training kicking in as he analyzed the terrain. Behind them, a loud crash echoed through the canyon. Nathan turned to see a reptilian student struggling to climb a steep incline. The student slipped, falling several feet before catching themselves on a jagged outcrop. Lyra hesitated. Should we help? Nathan didn't answer immediately. He knew stopping could cost them valuable time, but leaving someone behind went against everything he stood for. Stay here, he said finally, handing Lyra his pack. I'll be quick. He made his way back to the struggling student, moving with practiced ease. Hold on, he called out. I've got you. The reptilian's eyes widened in surprise as Nathan extended a hand. Why are you helping me? It rasped. Because it's the right thing to do, Nathan said simply. With a grunt of effort, he pulled the student to safety. Can you make it from here? The student nodded, still stunned. Thank you. Nathan returned to Lyra, who shook her head in disbelief. "You're something else, Kate." He shrugged. "Just doing what I'd want someone to do for me." They pressed on, the storm growing closer with each step. The canyon narrowed, and the sound of the beacon's signal began to cut through the air, a rhythmic pulse that guided them toward their goal. As they rounded the final bend, they saw it, the beacon, perched on a precarious ledge overlooking a chasm. Nathan stepped forward, determination etched on his face. "This is it," he said, glancing back at Lyra. "Let's finish this." With careful precision, he made his way to the beacon, his every movement deliberate. The wind howled around him, threatening to knock him off balance, but he didn't falter. Reaching the beacon, he activated it with a press of a button. A flare shot into the sky, cutting through the storm clouds. Nathan turned back to Lyra, a triumphant grin on his face. "Let's get out of here," he said. As they made their way back, Nathan couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Zinark's test had been brutal, but it had only reinforced what he already knew: humanity was built to endure. And no amount of doubt or disdain could change that.